You've been saving for retirement for 30 years. You've done everything right. You've maxed out your 401k, built your nest egg, hit your number. But here's the terrifying truth. Most people who retire comfortably end up broke within 15 years, not because they didn't save enough, because they made 7 critical mistakes after they stopped working. Today, I'm going to show you how to avoid every single one. If you're watching this video, you're probably 5, 10, maybe 15 years from retirement. You've been planning, you've been disciplined, you've sacrificed, and you're asking yourself one question: will it be enough? Here's what I've learned after studying hundreds of retirees. The ones who stay wealthy don't just save differently, they behave differently once they retire. And the gap between those who thrive and those who struggle isn't about how much money they have, it's about 7 specific habits. These aren't the people posting beach photos from their dream retirement. These are your neighbors, the quiet ones, the ones driving older cars but somehow never worried about money. Therefore, if you want a retirement that actually lasts, where you sleep well at night and never fear running out, you need to understand what they're doing differently. Let's break down all 7 habits, starting with the one that goes against everything you've been taught about retirement. Habit number 1: they maintain a permanent spending gap. Now, here's what you've been told your entire working life: save now, spend later. Sacrifice during your career, therefore you can finally enjoy your money in retirement. Makes sense, right? You've earned it. You deserve it. But here's the problem with that thinking. It turns retirement into a countdown clock. You start spending at a certain level, and every month you're wondering, how long until it runs out? The quietly wealthy, they think about it completely differently. They understand something most people miss. Wealth isn't what you spend, it's what you don't spend, even in retirement. Let me explain what this actually looks like. When their investment portfolio has a great year, when the market's up and their net worth hits a new high, their lifestyle doesn't automatically upgrade. They don't go buy a new car because they can afford it now. They don't move to a bigger house. They don't start eating out 5 nights a week. Their monthly expenses stay intentionally stable, flat, predictable. They treat their cost of living like a fixed utility bill, not a reward system that scales up with their account balance. Now, here's why this is so powerful. This creates a permanent gap, a buffer between what they could spend and what they actually spend. And this gap does 3 things that change everything. First, it absorbs inflation without stress. When groceries cost more, when insurance goes up, when property taxes increase, they barely feel it. Why? Because they weren't spending at their maximum anyway. They have room. Second, it protects against market downturns. And listen, markets will crash. They always do. But when you're not dependent on peak portfolio values to fund your lifestyle, you don't have to panic. You don't have to sell at the bottom. You can wait it out. Third, and this is the big one, it removes the fear of running out. That nightmare you have where you're 85 and broke and dependent on your kids, it becomes mathematically impossible when you maintain this spending gap. So while most retirees increase their spending as their confidence rises, the quietly wealthy do the opposite. They increase their margin of safety. So while everyone else is white knuckling through market volatility, they're sleeping peacefully because that margin, that's not just money, that's peace of mind. But maintaining a spending gap only works if you're not bleeding money on maintenance. Because even if you're not spending much, if everything you own is expensive to maintain, you're still losing. Which brings us to the second habit. They design a low maintenance life. Here's something nobody tells you about retirement. High maintenance lifestyles don't just drain your bank account, they drain your energy, your time, your mental capacity. Think about the typical image of a successful retirement: luxury car, maybe even 2, second home, boat at the marina, country club membership, expensive hobbies that require gear, lessons, travel. Sounds amazing, right? You've worked hard. You deserve the best. But here's what comes with all of that, and this is where most people get blindsided. Constant upkeep. That boat, it needs winterizing, repairs, storage fees, insurance. The second home, property management, utilities year-round, maintenance issues when you're not there. The luxury car, expensive parts, premium insurance, specialized service. Every single one of these things becomes a project, a headache, a time sink. And here's what's insidious: it creates decision fatigue. Which contractor should I hire? Should I fix the boat or replace it? When was the last time you used a country club membership? Is it still worth it? You retired to have more freedom, but now you're managing more stuff than ever. Quietly wealthy retirees figured this out early. They avoid this trap completely. Here's what they choose instead: one reliable, paid off vehicle. Not flashy, not new, just dependable. A 10-year-old Toyota that starts every time and costs almost nothing to maintain. A modest, well located home. Not the biggest house in the neighborhood, just the right size, in a good location. Easy to maintain. No wasted space they have to heat, cool, and clean. Fewer possessions overall. Less stuff that requires their attention, their time, their energy. Now, their goal isn't minimalism because it's trendy, it's freedom from friction. Therefore, every hour they're not dealing with maintenance, scheduling contractors, or making decisions about stuff is an hour they can spend with grandkids, with friends, on their health, reading, traveling, actually living. Less maintenance means more life. That's the trade. And it's a trade the quietly wealthy make gladly. But even if you're spending wisely and keeping life simple, there's a silent wealth killer that most retirees completely ignore. It's not the market, it's not inflation, it's taxes. And that's the third habit. They obsess over after-tax returns. Now, here's how most retirees think about their money. My portfolio returned 8% last year. I'm doing great. But the quietly wealthy ask a different question. How much of that 8% do I actually get to keep? Because here's the truth that changes everything. Taxes are often the single largest controllable expense in retirement. Not your car, not your house. Taxes. And most people don't realize this until it's too late. Let me show you why this matters. Imagine two retirees. Both have $1 million. Both need $50,000 a year to live. Retiree A pulls money randomly from whatever account is convenient. Sometimes the 401k, sometimes a taxable brokerage account, whatever. Retiree B plans strategically. They withdraw from tax-advantaged accounts in low-income years. They take capital gains when they're in lower brackets. They convert traditional IRA money to Roth in years when it makes sense. They coordinate Social Security timing with their tax situation. Same portfolio, same spending. But over 20 years, retiree B pays $200,000 less in taxes. $200,000. That's 4 years of living expenses that retiree A just handed to the IRS unnecessarily. The quietly wealthy understand this. Therefore, they plan years in advance. They think about strategic withdrawal sequencing, which accounts to tap first, second, third based on current tax law. Tax-efficient account usage, keeping the right investments in the right types of accounts, reducing unnecessary taxable income, being smart about required minimum distributions, Social Security claiming strategies, even which investments generate the most tax-efficient returns. They know that earning 7% and losing 30% to taxes is worse than earning 5% and keeping most of it. And here's the beautiful part. This habit alone can preserve hundreds of thousands of dollars over a retirement, without taking any extra risk, without having to beat the market, just by being smarter about taxes. But here's something most people don't realize until it happens to them. None of this matters if your health fails, because medical expenses can wipe out decades of careful planning in just a few years, which is why the fourth habit might be the most important one. They treat health as their most valuable asset. Here's a harsh reality about retirement. Quiet wealth collapses quickly when health collapses. You can do everything right financially. Perfect spending discipline, smart tax planning, great investment returns. But one serious health crisis, a heart attack, a stroke, a cancer diagnosis, and suddenly you're spending 50, 70, 100,000 a year on medical care. The quietly wealthy understand this deeply. Therefore, they don't treat health as a hobby or self-care, they treat it as financial protection. And they start early, not when something goes wrong, before. Here's what this actually looks like. Consistent, moderate exercise. Not CrossFit 6 days a week, not training for marathons, just walking. Strength training twice a week. Swimming. Staying mobile. Building habits they can sustain for decades. Preventative healthcare. Regular checkups, screenings, catching problems when they're small and cheap to fix instead of waiting until they're big and catastrophically expensive. Simple routines they can actually maintain. No extreme diets, no unsustainable workout plans, just healthy habits that fit into normal life. They're not chasing six-pack abs or extreme fitness. They're chasing something much more valuable: longevity and independence. Because good health does three critical things. It reduces medical costs dramatically. Preventative care is always cheaper than crisis care. It extends your active retirement years, what financial planners call the go-go years, when you can actually enjoy your money and your life. It preserves quality of life. The difference between a retirement where you're independent and healthy at 80 versus dependent on others at 70 is everything. Therefore, to the quietly wealthy, that morning walk isn't about vanity. It's about not having to spend $200,000 on heart surgery. That healthy dinner isn't about dieting. It's about keeping their retirement plan intact. Health isn't self-care to them. It's financial protection. And it might be the best investment they ever make. But even with great spending discipline, low maintenance, smart taxes, and good health, there's one thing that can still derail everything: panic. Specifically, panic about the stock market. That's the fifth habit. They are emotionally detached from markets. Now, here's what happens to most retirees during a market crash. They watch CNBC, they see their portfolio drop 20, 30, 40%, they panic, they sell everything to preserve what's left, and therefore they lock in massive losses right at the bottom, just before the market recovers. It's the single most wealth-destroying behavior in retirement. The quietly wealthy? They don't even feel the panic. Not because they're braver, not because they're smarter about markets, but because they've made one crucial decision that changes everything. They keep 2 to 3 years of living expenses in cash or ultra-safe assets. That's their secret weapon. Think about what this does psychologically. When the market crashes, when everyone else is panicking because they need to sell stocks to pay their bills, the quietly wealthy just shrug. Why? Because their immediate needs are completely covered. They don't need to touch their investments for 2 or 3 years. They can wait. They can let the market recover naturally. This buffer allows them to ignore market crashes completely. They don't even need to check their statements. Avoid panic selling. They're never forced to sell at the bottom because they need money. Let long-term investments recover naturally. Markets always recover eventually, but only if you can afford to wait. Because their immediate needs are covered, market volatility loses its emotional power over them. They've shifted from the accumulation mindset you have during your working years, where you're trying to maximize returns, to the preservation mindset of retirement, where you're trying to minimize stress. Therefore, while everyone else is watching the market like it's entertainment, making emotional decisions, constantly worried, the quietly wealthy are gardening, reading, spending time with grandchildren. Because their financial plan doesn't depend on perfect market timing. It depends on having enough cushion to weather any storm. But here's something that surprises people. Even wealthy retirees can feel isolated and unhappy because they built their social life around expensive activities they can't sustain forever. Which brings us to the sixth habit. They build high-value, low-cost relationships. Here's the trap many retirees fall into. They built their social life around expensive activities: dinners at high-end restaurants, golf at exclusive clubs, trips that cost thousands, social status that requires constant spending to maintain. It feels good, it feels successful, but it's expensive and it's fragile because the moment your spending drops, whether by choice or necessity, those relationships often disappear too. The quietly wealthy build their social lives differently. They don't rely on expensive restaurants, exclusive clubs, and spending money to belong. Instead, they invest in family time, community involvement, volunteering, simple shared activities that cost almost nothing. Coffee on the porch with neighbors, walking groups, book clubs, volunteering at the local food bank, grandkids coming over for pizza night. Their luxury isn't appearances, it's control over their time. And here's why this matters more than you think, because their happiness isn't tied to spending. It remains stable even when markets fluctuate. When the portfolio drops 30%, they don't have to cancel their entire social life because it was built on expensive activities. They just keep doing what they've always done: walking, talking, connecting. Therefore, they've built a retirement that's financially sustainable and emotionally fulfilling. The two things go hand in hand. But there's one final habit, and honestly, it might be the one that determines whether your family remembers your retirement as a blessing or a burden. They plan their legacy with intention. The quietly wealthy don't leave things to chance. They've seen what happens when people do. Unplanned wealth creates family conflict, kids fighting over money, legal confusion that drags on for years, emotional stress that tears families apart. Therefore, they prepare, deliberately, thoughtfully. They have updated wills and trusts, clear medical directives so their kids aren't guessing what they would have wanted, financial directives that remove ambiguity. They make thoughtful inheritance decisions ahead of time when they can explain their reasoning, when they can be fair and clear. And here's something beautiful. Many practice giving while living, helping adult children with a down payment when it makes a difference, supporting causes they care about while they can see the impact, creating memories and meaning instead of just leaving a check. The ultimate payoff is peace. Peace knowing their wealth won't become a burden. Peace knowing their family won't fight. Peace knowing they've handled their affairs with the same care and intention they brought to building wealth in the first place. So there they are, 7 habits that separate retirees who stay quietly wealthy from those who slowly watch it slip away. They maintain a permanent spending gap. They design low-maintenance lives. They obsess over after-tax returns. They treat health as their most valuable asset. They're emotionally detached from markets. They build high-value, low-cost relationships, and they plan their legacy with intention. None of this requires more money. It just requires different decisions. And the beautiful part, you can start making these decisions today, whether you're 5 years from retirement or 20, whether you have $1 million saved or you're still building. Because retirement wealth isn't about reaching some magic number. It's about building habits that make whatever number you have actually last. So, which habit are you going to implement first? Let me know in the comments. And if this video helped you see retirement differently, do me a favor, share it with someone who's planning their retirement too. Because the quietly wealthy don't gatekeep this stuff, they share it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.